Hello and welcome to everybody to Creating Value in Testing, our live webinar today with Mike Jarrod. Mike, thanks very much for giving up your time today. For those of you who haven't met Mike yet, Mike is an IT practitioner with over 3 decades of experience in software testing and quality management across a number of different industries. I've known Mike for a number of years and worked across different domains. He's a program chair of the Assurance Leadership Forum, which meet regularly to facilitate personal and professional development, and is predominantly focused at people and folk that work in technology. So thank you very much indeed, Mike, for coming along today. During the course of, thank you. During the course of the webinar, we'll be monitoring the chat room, which you should be able to see on your dashboard if you're taking part. Please pop any questions or queries you have in there. Phil is here in the office. He'll be noting these down and we'll cover them off as soon as we've been through. But please do interact as much as you possibly can. With that, Mike, anything else you'd like to add?
No, I just like to say, please feel free to think of questions as we go through the slides. And if there is anything on your mind, anything you want clarifications on, or anything you think I'm saying which is just nuts and you want to challenge me on it, then please let's have the conversation. If you could give Phil your name, just so that when the questions come through, we know who we're talking to. That'll just keep it really interactive, I hope.
Splendid. So let's kick this off. So, Mike, firstly, why are we talking about the value of testing?
Okay, so the reason I thought this was a good thing to talk about is because I've been really fortunate, as you've said, to have worked in a number of different organizations of different sizes, from startups to major corporates, across different industry verticals in the last 30 years. The majority of that time has been in a testing or quality management or quality assurance capacity. And there hasn't been one organization that I've worked in that hasn't had a problem where testing has been undervalued. And this still feels like it's a hot topic in industry. I was recently at UK Star, that was one of the conferences that the Eurostar team run. And there's a whole track on the value of testing there. And quite a lot of conversations happening on LinkedIn and at other events about how testers and testing teams and test managers need to do things differently in order for them to be recognized as being valuable. And that still persists today in the agile world, where we've got co-located multifunctional teams of people who have got autonomy and accountability for delivering good quality software. It's still the testers that tend to get asked the questions about why they're doing things in a certain way, and having a challenge from some stakeholders on the value for money. So that's why I thought we'd talk about it today. And the first thing I just wanted to mention to all of our fellow test community members who are tuning in today is about stakeholders and why stakeholders are important. And the reality here is that stakeholders really give us the mandate to test. They are the people who give us the budget for tools, they pay for our salaries, they help us find suppliers to do our work for us sometimes. And so without stakeholders who are willing to invest in us, we don't actually have a mandate to do any testing. And I think some of the reasons that we have issues with not being valued as a testing community in our organizations is because we don't always engage with our stakeholders in the right way, in a language that they'll understand. And we need to get better at that because, as the slide says, we are an information business. We are in the business of providing information to stakeholder groups in order for them to be able to make effective decisions. And I think we do have a reasonable reputation of having good technical skills, but we're not very good with our social skills sometimes and being able to articulate what we do for our stakeholders. And when we're in that position, we don't always sell ourselves particularly well. And our stakeholders don't understand what we do for them that helps them. And they don't necessarily trust and respect us. And that's why I think there is a value problem in the testing industry in some companies. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So gaining the respect of stakeholders is clearly really important, so that they have the relevant information they need. How do you know what to say to different groups?
Okay, so I'll come on to that in a second. There's just one more thing I meant to say, actually, that just slipped my mind. But if we don't give stakeholders the information that they need, they may just perceive us as not doing a good job. And I think it was Bill Gates that put this quote up. He said that your intentions don't matter, perception is reality. And if people perceive you the wrong way, it doesn't matter what your intentions are. And the way I interpret that, and I think what Bill is saying there is, even if you are running a testing function, or you're a tester and you're doing the best job that you can do for the right reasons and testing in the most effective way, if your stakeholders don't understand that that is happening and the value that you're providing, they may perceive you the wrong way. And it then doesn't matter what your intentions are. The perception is broken, so it needs to be fixed. So also, I've just got to click this button here. If you haven't got the right stakeholder perceptions in place, it can be really quite damaging when you work in that environment. You tend to find it manifested when stakeholders start asking about the value or the, oops, sorry, got to keep my fingers off the keyboard, the value, the cost, the effectiveness, or the efficiency of testing. When those questions start coming out, you know that you've got a problem where you need to engage differently with your stakeholders to see if you can help them understand what you are doing and why you're doing it. In the environment where stakeholders' perceptions aren't good, it can erode the trust and respect that stakeholders have with you as a testing function or as a testing team. And this tends to create additional work, because all of a sudden you find yourself having to do more work in reviews and demonstrating, perhaps your testing approaches, your testing plans, your reasons for doing your work in a certain way. You find you're being challenged on your estimates because people don't like the cost of what you're doing. And it can increase the overheads around governance and assurance that audit bodies have in terms of calling people into reviews. And generally, this impacts the whole team, whether you're a test manager or whether you're a test lead or somebody working as a tester. Everybody then has to get involved in providing this information to people in and amongst doing the day job. And so rectification of this this trust problem detracts from the focus and sometimes the time to do delivery work. Funding can become an issue. I have seen financial rewards for teams get reduced and teams not get bonuses, when in fact it felt very fair that this should be rewarded well. And of course, it negatively impacts on morale and team spirit. And in and of itself, when it's like this, the reputation testing in an organization is based on opinion and subjectivity. It's not based on data. And that really isn't fun for anybody to work in that environment.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you say, speaking clearly, and the language is clearly important. How do you know, going back to my previous question, sorry, with regards to which types of stakeholders and different types of stakeholders, how do you know what to say?
Okay, so the things you have to do are kind of twofold, I think, in my experience. It's worked for me. The first one is to do a stakeholder mapping exercise. And it sounds pretty obvious that we should know who our stakeholders are, but actually we sometimes don't. We've sometimes got stakeholders of our function that are quite hidden from us. And that could be because we've got reporting lines where we report into in an old world, a project manager, and a project manager reports to a project board, and then a project board goes to an accountable executive, and an accountable executive then communicates information out to other parties that are interested. But in that kind of federated information supply chain, data gets changed, information gets skewed, and the messages don't always land in a way that we would like them to. And in today's world with Agile and DevOps, you might have a product owner that you identify as your key stakeholder. But there's lots of people around the edges in organizations that will value information from testing. So you have to identify who they are. And this grid I've put up on the screen here really shows that what I try to do is categorize who my stakeholders are by their groups. So this shows I've got technology stakeholders, operational stakeholders, business stakeholders, and governance stakeholders. And what I try to do is map them onto a grid that shows the level of risk that a stakeholder has if we don't get things right as a software delivery team, and the level of exposure they get, i.e. the impact of any problems if we don't do our jobs well. And by thinking about our stakeholders in those categories, we can put them into a box or somewhere near a box that says whether we need to monitor them casually, like in this side, finance stakeholders, or whether we need to manage them really closely, like our top technical operations stakeholders, or our security teams. That gives me a sense of who I need to talk to and the cadence and the frequency I need to talk to them about the sort of work that we're doing to keep them on side. And so once you've got that stakeholder mapping achieved, the next thing to do is really talk to them and find out what information they need from you in order to understand what you do so they can understand your value. And again, a lot of this to a degree is common sense. But when you think about the number of stakeholders that an organization may have and the sort of information that they need from you, it becomes very clear that all stakeholder needs are different. So if we look at this box here and it says Agile Delivery Managers, they're interested in progress, risks and issues, defects, impediments, capability, and value for money. But if you look at, for example, auditors, internal and external audit, they're interested in process compliance, they're interested in process improvement, and residual risk as a result of the work that you're doing. And so if you think about what your stakeholders want and you start to talk to them, you find out a lot of them need very disparate pieces of information in order to understand what you do. So we need to really start to find out who our stakeholders are and then work out what it is they need from us in order for them to understand the value we bring to them as a stakeholder group.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is in an ideal world, everyone would have everything they need. Have you had, in your experience, any examples where stakeholder engagement hasn't been right, and what did you do?
Sure. So absolutely, I have. As I mentioned at the beginning, I don't think I've worked in an organisation where there haven't been negative perceptions in some stakeholders about what testing teams do. And then the example I'll share here is one that I had with a tech ops division in a company I work for. So for those people who work in smaller organisations and don't maybe have a larger technical operations department, they're the team that actually accepts software formally into the operation environment, and as a result have to deal with any production issues that are present if defects get found in production software. and if we as a set of delivery professionals get it wrong, they're the ones who get the pain. They're on the pages, they're on the call outs at 2 a.m, they're working weekends, they're running in the war rooms and under enormous amount of pressure. And in one of my organizations I worked at, when I joined, the testing and the operations team were absolutely not in love. I make a bit of a joke of it, but it was the complete opposite. You know, they thought we were incompetent, they thought we were uncaring, and we were working in isolation from them. And I started to talk to the service managers and the head of ops, and it was a really, really painful set of conversations. And I thought, wow, this is awful, because we're all working in the same organization and for the same objectives, but things just aren't right here. And the conversations were difficult, they were emotionally charged, and they were angry at times. And I really didn't quite know what was going on, but I started to drill into it. And what was really going on behind the scenes is that operations didn't actually think we were any good at testing, but we were, but they didn't know that we were. And they thought that because there were on occasion production errors, we were pretty much incompetent and not very good at doing our job. They thought and believed that we did exhaustive testing and that we were expected to deliver defect-free software, and they had a very low risk appetite. And what they didn't realize is that, you know, we do care, but we work with different financial, time and technical constraints. So we've got a different set of parameters that we work in when delivering our testing service. And often these conversations don't happen, and so there are perceptions and beliefs between stakeholders that make the engagement poor between stakeholders and suppliers like testing. So what I really needed to do was break that tension and improve the expectations of stakeholders and explain what we did in a delivery sense. So I needed to talk to them in a different language, and I thought the best way to do this was to provide them with some data. So this next slide shows a run chart. And there's a lot going on here, but I'll do my best to explain it reasonably quickly and simply. I'm expecting that most people in the webinar that have joined have heard of defect leakage and understand that as a software testing team, you can track the amount of defects that you find before you go to production and the amount of defects that are actually sometimes released in production software. And you can do a sum that says, how many defects have you found in the earlier stages? and how many defects have we found in production, and you can work out the percentage effectiveness of defect removal, or the inverse of that is the defect leakage. Now, I started to produce this run chart to show that actually what we were able to do was find, on average, 99.4% of all defects that were found, and only 6.6%, 0.6% of defects were actually finding their way into the production systems. Suddenly this switched a few lights on for the ops team, because they didn't know that there was this level of protection that we could supply them with, or were supplying them with. And they could see that actually a very, very small number of defects were leaking through into the production environment that they had to service and fix forwards. So that took some of the heat out of the conversation about us being incompetent and them not having a lot of faith in us. And what it then enabled us to do was start to have a more sensible conversation about the cost of having to close the 0.6 gap, and actually whether we needed to close the 0.6. Because what I asked the ops team to do was calculate the average cost of fixing a production issue. And we worked out the average cost of increasing our testing scope and our testing efforts to try and close that gap. And economically, there was a much stronger case to say it's better to let some defects leak and fix them forwards because it's cheaper. And if we can fix forwards quickly enough, it doesn't have a massive risk on our reputation as an organisation. So it wasn't comfortable on either side, and it needed the CIO to broker the conversation, because ultimately the CIO is a person who could bring the two heads together and actually say, as an organisation, this is what we think the optimal way of working is and the most cost-effective way of working is. But by providing the data and starting to show some information to our key stakeholder, we were able to get to a place of agreement about the target we'd look to maintain, which was 99.5%. And they were then more accepting of the fact that they would need to fix forwards on occasion. So it had a good outcome in the end, I'm pleased to say.
Yeah, absolutely. So the trust is...
Sorry, Jen, one thing I just recommend to people, that the quote at the top of the slide says, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. And for anybody who doesn't know who said that, it was a process improvement expert called W. Edwards Deming. He's almost like the godfather of lean and process improvement. But when I said earlier that often stakeholders have a perception of you and it's based on subjectivity and opinion, that's what happens when you don't have enough data to actually give people information that then dispels the myths. So there's a good example of that. Anybody who wants to know a bit more should read the books and the articles that are written by Deming to get some more insight into this.
Fab. So it's clear the need to be trusted by your stakeholders is absolutely key. How do you go about gaining trust, or how did you fix it?
Okay, so it's interesting, isn't it? Because you can have a whole bunch of technical skills around you that make you an incredibly good tester. You can know test automation, you can know the non-functional world inside out, you can be very good with API testing, you can be good with exploratory testing, and you can know your craft inside out. But actually what makes you credible with people and trusted with people are actually things about how you behave. And I did a lot of research into this and spoke to a lot of people about how do you build trust and credibility with your stakeholders and your teams and in your organization. And for me, this comes down to 6 key behavioral traits that people who are trusted and are credible have. And the first one about building trust is being consistent in what you do and how you do it. And it's about behaving with integrity, and it's working in a way that gives people confidence in your competence. And so you have to be that a person of integrity and really behave in a way that inspires people to believe in you. And that comes through the following 5 behavioral elements. So authenticity is about having passion for what you do and actually genuinely caring about what you do as a professional in this industry. I hear a lot of people in testing communities talking about them being passionate about their craft. But actually, at a number of organizations I've worked in, I see a lot of people who are just willing to pedal the bike and take the money and say they're passionate about what they do, but don't really do it for intellectual reward or for a sense of personal self-development. They do it just a way to earn money. So being passionate and really caring about what you do, I think, is one of the first things you need to have to be authentic. And I think communicating effectively using personal stories is a very effective way of building authenticity into your behaviours. So if I'm talking to a stakeholder about why I'm taking a certain approach on something, I'll often share a story about what went wrong in a previous organisation or a previous project and how that felt to me and what the impact was on the stakeholders, and then sell the reasons why we're deciding to make decisions in a certain way, so that they can see not only the logic behind it, but you start to engage with them on a very human basis by telling a story about what you're doing and why. And being very clear with people about your values, about what you do and how you do it, is a good way to start to get people to understand how you think and the kinds of value system that you have that drives your behavior. And if you build those into your team, and that's how your team culture works, people will really start to understand what you're about as a unit and as a team of people. And so building on authenticity, you then have transparency. And this is really, really easy. This is just about being honest. It's about being simple with your language and your communication, and being very unambiguous, and just being completely honest with people and being aware of them. We work in quite difficult, complex technical world, but sometimes we talk to people in complex, difficult terms when we don't need to. And particularly when you think about some of our non-technology stakeholders, sometimes in the governance world or sometimes in the business or the finance world, they don't need to hear the jargon. They just need to hear what you're doing and why you're doing it in a very simple way so they understand. Positive action is important. It's about being accountable, and it's taking responsibility for any previous errors that have happened and demonstrating improvement through your actions. Being empathic and listening to people, seeking feedback with your stakeholders, checking that you understand it, and then working on that feedback in order to provide a better service is an important thing to do. And also being responsive. And this is a classic of doing what you say you will do when you said you will do it. And if we can all start to bring those behaviours into our daily lives and into that of our teams, then I think it will build trust with stakeholders and makes us very credible as a brand and an organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. All great characteristics to have wherever you are, but very key here.
Good talk to us generally.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else you can share that will help people working in testing describe the value of testing wherever they may be?
Yeah, there is. So actually what I'm going to do is quickly skip back a couple of slides if you don't mind. So Liz will whiz past you. But I want to go back to this slide. And when I said all stakeholders' needs are different, there's actually some commonality between them. And I've put in red the information that most stakeholders have in common. And it's all about cost or value for money. So when it comes down to selling the value of testing, I think what we have to do is become very good at actually articulating how we provide value for money in our organizations. Now, Jen, I'm going to ask you a question. If you buy your food from a certain supermarket, how do you know you're getting value for money? Is it something you can easily explain?
No, absolutely not. No, you tend to go with gut, don't you?
Yeah, and so our stakeholders often believe that they understand what good value for money looks like, but it's all, again, it's very subjective. So when you talk about value, I find it very helpful to have a narrative or a definition of what value for money looks like, so you can express that to people and then show how you fit against that definition.
Yeah.
So I was very fortunate a while ago to work for the Financial Conduct Authority. And although the FCA were not a genuine government body, we were seen to have funds that funded the regulatory work we did that came from the firms that we regulated. But that money actually came from the public purse by people buying financial services products. So the National Audit Office needed to be assured on an annual basis that everything we did provided good value for money. So that they could be confident we were spending, government money and public money in the best possible way. And so they very helpfully have a definition. And I'm going to read it out, although people can see it here. It says, good value for money is the optimal use of resources to achieve the intended outcomes. And the thing I'll pull out to discuss here a little bit more is the word optimal. It means the most desirable possible, given expressed or implied restrictions or constraints. And value for money is not about achieving the lowest initial price. So to bring that to life a little bit, the next slide kind of shows this in a bit more context. If we think about three things in testing that make up value for money, there's the effectiveness. Now, I've already described that by talking to stakeholders, I can talk about how effective we need to be as a testing function. So if I need to hit that 99.5% target of defect prevention to stop defects hitting the production environment, I've got an effectiveness outcome I can measure. So I kind of know what that is. What I need to think about are the economy points in the value for money equation and the efficiency. And so when it comes down to getting the most optimal price for things, given implied restraints and constraints, it isn't about the lowest price point. So if I'm buying in testing services from a large system integrator, I won't necessarily buy from the cheapest provider. I'll buy from the provider that I think have got the right skill, have got the right capabilities, the right additional value that will help us as a team beyond the initial brief of doing some testing work for us. And that may cost me a little bit more, but I think I'll get better outcomes in my testing business. Because what that means is I'll then be able to start to look at the efficiency. If my provider I'm paying a bit more money for helps us become more efficient, and so we get more productivity from the work we do with them, then actually that's a really good trade-off to be able to calculate and demonstrate. And so if we think about efficiency, it can be anything from really simple stuff like scope determination being different, looking at risk-based testing, exploratory testing, the automation pyramid. More recently, it can be working out what sort of AI and ML technologies we can leverage from system integrators to help us improve the efficiency of the testing that we do in order to hit our effectiveness and our outcomes. And what that's really saying is if you can be confident your economy is right and your efficiency is good, and you're meeting your effectiveness targets, then you're able to say fairly conclusively and scientifically, we provide a value for money service. And I think that's really important to be able to do.
Yeah. Great way of looking at it. And yeah, very, very helpful. So you've obviously learned an awful lot over your time in the industry and growing all the time. Where do you go, may I ask, beyond this to learn more about or more about the industry? Can you recommend any events or communities that people might be able to find out more about?
Yeah, sure, I certainly can. I'll put a couple of things down here. So when I started off as a fledgling tester, I took my, it wasn't ISTQB, it was ISEB in those days.
I remember that well.
to get my understanding about what my role meant in a different context. Now, I'm not saying that I love the ISTQB schemes. It doesn't make professional testers, but it does give people a starting point to understand what their role could be about. Once I got to the point where I got my practitioner certificates and I had my first strategy management job, I really felt a bit unsure about where to go to know whether I was making the right kind of strategic decisions. So I started going to conferences, and I used to go to Eurostar quite a lot. That was a great place to go to mix with other testers and learn from really good stories from those other testers about what they were doing in their world. I've also been to the Unicom events. Most recently, Unicom have been putting on some very good events where they bring 3 or 4 different streams together. So in the morning, you can have a central team, a central conference around a topic like Agile and DevOps, but then that'll break into a testing stream and an AI stream and an Agile stream and a communication stream in the afternoon. And you can jump along to those. So I think the Unicom events are very good. The event that I really started to go to about 8 years ago, I suppose. No, 12 years ago, was the Test Management Forum. And at the Test Management Forum, I was able to mix with a lot of other test managers and senior test managers and heads of test. And that forum was great because you didn't get talked at by a guy on a stage. You were led through a series of discussions by a facilitator on challenges and key topics. And that event was probably the pivotal thing for me. It gave me very different perspectives, very different viewpoints, and a really good support network around me of professional people. And also found a really good mentor there who was my mentor for a number of years and was able to challenge my thinking and really develop me as a person in my professional life and somewhat in my personal life as well. So I think by going out to forums and meetups, that's a really good thing to do. And the Test Management Forum is now the forum that I chair and I own to a degree. It's now the Assurance Leadership Forum. I've opened it up to a broader church of technical disciplines, and it really is there on a quarterly basis in central London to help facilitate the personal and professional development of technologists. So if you want to know more about that, please ping me a note later on.
Fab. Yeah, I look forward to that. I think the next one's next week on the 24th.
Yeah, next week we'll all be there.
So are you ready to quick fire some questions?
Yeah, certainly. I'm really up to it. If any questions there, please go ahead, Phil or Jen.
Lovely. So we have first one from Christian Miles. Interesting question. Are salespeople our stakeholders?
Well, I'll tell you what, that's a great question. They're somewhere on the dividing line, I think, Christian. I love the question, and I don't know why you're asking it, but I'm smiling because salespeople, on one hand, are often people that put technology teams in a really difficult place because they'll overpromise in the market and create a huge expectation with customers about what we can deliver without checking in on us to find out what we can deliver. And so they are a stakeholder in so much that they're the ones who will earn the money that comes into the organization that feeds the software development machine. And ultimately, they are the ones that go back to customers. If the customers aren't happy, they'll get it in the neck. So they are a stakeholder. They're a slightly different breed, I think, than technology stakeholders, because they've got a very different sense of information they need. They really want to know, is it going to meet the customer's requirements, and are they going to get it tomorrow? That's what they really want to know.
Yeah.
So they need a fair amount of reining in and management. But yeah, they're certainly stakeholders, in my opinion.
Lovely. This isn't a question, it's more of a statement, really, but John Dimmock very kindly said, clear and correct communication is key, as is empathy with sponsors. Too many testers are unknown to their paymasters, in my opinion. So interesting one there.
And what I think does that, if I can just I think it's a great observation. So thank you for agreeing, John. It's because as testers, we come up generally from the technology route, and so we learn our skills to be a tester. We learn our skills about working with tools and data and environments and virtual machines and the cloud and all these amazing good technical things. But nobody really teaches us how to talk to people outside of our technical world. Then when we find ourselves in a slightly more senior position where we have to interface with stakeholders, that personal development side is missing. So it's not something that we could say is our fault, but it's something we need to be mindful of as we grow and develop in our careers.
Mm-hmm. Sandeep has kindly asked, will we be sharing the slideshow afterwards?
I believe so, Jen.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. We will be sending out a link to the recording, and if Mike's happy for us to send out the slides, then we can do that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Stu Johnson has kindly come up with a question. There is a significant number of stakeholders presented here in your presentation. In your experience, is this more problematic in big organizations than smaller ones? We don't have 90% of these roles, for example.
No, that's absolutely true. So if you work in a startup, you've generally got a CTO and a CEO, and they'll be the people who are driving a series of technical discussions and decisions to build something and get it out to market as soon as possible. You won't have all of the corporate governance. You won't have the finance stakeholders around you. There's a lot less bureaucracy and things are a lot simpler. And as a result, you have a smaller stakeholder set. When you start to work in the banks, or you start to work in, any organizations that's probably employing 2,000 plus people, you start to get functions that are very disparate, that all need different information. And in your average corporate, that's why you get a supplier management department, you get a procurement department, you'll have an operations function, you'll have a whole team of people looking at governance and audit. And so when you work in the broader organizations, there's a much greater need for identifying stakeholders and working with them to express your value.
Yeah, and I suppose if you work in a smaller company, as it grows, maybe once every 6 months you sort of sit back and have a re-look at it to see what's changed and if new stakeholders have sort of suddenly grown as well.
And that's a really good tip. The landscape, the stakeholder landscape changes continually.
Yeah.
So probably,
Yeah.
that stakeholder mapping exercise, for me, that's not a one-off thing. You're probably worth doing it every 6 months, depending on your IT strategy, your business strategy, and your growth rate and maturity as an organization.
Mm.
Yeah.
Marvin's asked an interesting question. What would you suggest individual test contractors do to compete with consultancies? I suppose he's thinking around sort of stakeholder engagement with that.
Well, I think it's I've got to be honest with you. In my experience, the good contractors out there, the ones that have better idea about how to engage with stakeholders, their lives depend on it. The SIs and the consultancies, I think, have sometimes got good account managers, but then the people in the teams don't have much of the personal development skills, social skills, and to a degree, I think they can survive more easily in the consultancies without those social skills, whereas your contractors can't. Your contractors generally are in there and having to really sell themselves and prove themselves on a daily basis. There's a higher level of exposure. So if the question is, as a contractor, how do I maintain an understanding about what stakeholders' needs are and how I can engage with them, I think it's probably important to keep asking the question of yourself, who are the people that maybe benefit from the work I do, talk to them and find out what they need, and see how the conversations go. There's plenty of personal development and professional development coaches out there who can help with some of the skills that are needed to ask the right questions in the right way of stakeholders, and behavioural coaches who can actually share information about how to listen well, how to use good body language, how to ask the right kind of open and closed questions in order to get the right kind of conversations going with different stakeholder groups. And I think having a good awareness of the culture of an organization is important. So as a contractor, you'll maybe go from a startup to a corporate. And most startups are quite informal, and you can just pitch up with the CIO and grab a coffee and have a chat with him, and it's really easy. In a lot of corporates, that's a harder job to do, and then maybe layers of management and EAs and PAs you've got to fight your way through to get to the guy at the top or the lady at the top. But understanding the culture and the accessibility of people is an important thing, because then you start to know how to play the game and get access to those people. So I did say it's Christian who asked the question.
Yeah, that was no, beg your pardon. That was Marvin.
Oh, sorry, Marvin. So Marvin, if you want to pop me a note if I haven't answered your question properly there, because I didn't quite get it, just drop me an email to mjared10@gmail.com, and we can have a chat on Skype or something later if you fancy.
This actually leads on to the next question. Why a pal of yours, I believe, Kirsten Kenny.
Oh,
she
Kirsten.
says, "Hi, Mike. Kirsten here. Have you explored EQ, otherwise called emotional intelligence?"
Yes, I have, and I didn't kind of put it out explicitly when I was talking about the behaviours, but I think when you start to work with empathy, you start to understand people, you understand their motivators, understanding sometimes their personality profiles, and understanding their backgrounds and their value systems and their belief systems. That helps you operate with a great deal of emotional intelligence, and that can really be good when you want to be authentic and when you want to build the trust and respect that we talked about. So EQ and IQ are really, really key things. So I agree. Yeah. Yes, then they're subjects in their own right. We could have another session, perhaps, Jen, on those very topics.
Well, I think it's just, we do a lot of recruitment for companies, and more and more, people are saying we can teach people skills. We don't mind. We'll invest in Java courses or webinar, teaching people tools, but we need the people with the active learning skills, or with the, who are people who are passionate and interested and curious. And that seems to be going, hands down. So John Dimmock's come up with another item. Thank you, John. Mike, in my view, a good way of proving value in testing is by using formal risk management and reporting, i.e. ISO 25010 assessments. Mm-hmm. This helps hugely to keep in tune with the change risks and the risks of not introducing parts of a product. What's your view of tying in risk and testing tightly and visibly? I do this on all programs and find it goes down very well with stakeholders.
Yeah, so I think it's a great idea, and it's a really good call, because ultimately testing is a risk management activity. That's what it is. We are there to remove risks, whether they're product risks or hardware risks or software risks or architectural risks or operational risks. You know, we are there to test all of those areas and actually make sure things work as they should do. So by describing the work you do from a risk-based basis and then being able to map that work into a risk management framework is a really good way of formally explaining what you do and why you're doing it, so people do understand it. And if that's the sort of organization that has the culture, where it has the kind of ISO standards that it operates to, and really believes in the value of those quality management systems and risk management systems, that can be a very effective way of doing it. That may not provide all the information that the finance stakeholders need, or the external audit or customer supplier audits need, but it certainly would keep the internal governance and the PMO offices and probably the security teams very satisfied. So I think it's great. And when I said you've got to understand the culture and understand what your stakeholders need, and the needs are generally all different, that will certainly satisfy in some organizations with a certain culture the right kind of information that they need to be confident in you. So yes, but it may be different in companies.
We've got 4 minutes left and I've got 2 more questions, so we might have a quick fire answers on these. So first from Diana, if as an IT managers we have to stand up run by the CIO, is it enough of providing information, or QA should provide some metrics to wider people range, i.e. CEO and sales hierarchy? Do you want me to repeat that?
No, it's okay. I think I understand the question. In the graph that I showed, bear with me, I'm going to flip back to it to hopefully answer Diana's question. Had to be the one right near the beginning, didn't it? So here, I mean, in this slide, I do talk about the CIO and COO and really being very close to this top right-hand corner where we need to manage them closely and give them good information. In this particular one, the CEO and CEO are down here. But all of these people, if you like, above the line, are people that we need to work with and provide information to, if they are present in your organization. And again, they will all have different information. So I found that being able to provide my CIO this kind of data about the effectiveness of testing that I showed here on a quarterly basis gave him a great deal of credibility when he went to talk to the executive board about how the IT function in the organization was performing, because he was able to talk about this protection level as being very, very strong in the industry and above that of some different organizations in different industry sectors. So the answer, Dan, I think, is yes, you need to talk to your CIO and provide them some data, but find out what they really need. Find out what their pain points are and their challenges are, and how you can help them. And sometimes the metrics and data won't be things you've got at your fingertips, and you need to work out how to construct them. But if there's genuine value in them, and it takes a few days to provide some extra information that over a course of a year keeps your CIO happy and on side, that's time well invested. And those conversations need to happen with all of the stakeholders you've got above the line in that grid once you've done your mapping.
Lovely. Brilliant.
Sorry, I can't be brief.
That's brilliant. I think actually we're getting pretty close to the time where we've got to say goodbye, because everyone's probably got to get back to their desks. So Debbie, I see your question there. I'll fill that with Mike and come back to you after the event, if that's okay. But just lastly, just to say thank you everybody for coming. And Mike, thank you so much. I think it's such a valuable subject to talk about, and it can really make the difference to how enjoyable work is, how productive teams are, and how really it can make places sing. So thank you very, very much. Anything you'd like to add before we sign off?
No, you're very welcome. I've thoroughly enjoyed myself, and it's nice to have the opportunity to share some ideas anyway. And if that's helped people, I'm really pleased. And please do get in touch on the Gmail account I've shown there if you've got any further questions. And I'm really happy to have discussion with people should you need to do that. Okay.
Brilliant. As I say, any other questions that we haven't covered, then we will come back to people individually. So thank you very much, and wishing you all a very happy afternoon. Thank you, and bye-bye for now.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.